Hey everyone,
I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries. After returning from Isla del Sol, I spent the afternoon waiting around Copacabana before eventually boarding an overnight bus to Peru, just as a huge storm was beginning to roll in. And it's actually not very far from Copacabana to the Peruvian border at all. It's only around 10 kilometers. And it was at that point, crossing through immigration into Peru, that I realized that I probably should have spent a bit more time thinking about money on my journey, because I had a stack of Bolivianos, the Bolivian currency, and it was when I got to the border that I realized that the exchange rate at the border and pretty much elsewhere in Latin America would probably be terrible. But I had this stack of cash, and instead of changing it there, just held on to it and decided to hope for the best once I moved onwards into Peru. The bus continued into the night and towards Puno. And this really began what was really a very rushed part of my trip. And I've said it before that Peru is the country that I probably neglected the most in my journey. And I really do owe it to Peru to, I think, go back and explore the landscapes and the people and the culture much more. But anyway, what unfolded over the next week was a very quick trip through some of the less touristed parts of this beautiful country. Before arriving, I'd been given a free eSIM by a company to trial, and I thought that Peru would be the perfect place to try it, except for some reason it completely failed. I just couldn't get it to sync on my phone, and this kind of set in motion a chain reaction which would keep coming back to haunt me every time that I bought a SIM card or an eSIM elsewhere in Latin America from that point moving forward. Late at night, the bus finally pulled into Puno, and that was where I disembarked the bus because it was continuing onwards to the more popular tourist city of Cusco. But I would be changing buses in Puno and heading onwards to a different city, Arequipa. The Puno bus station was absolute chaos. There were stalls everywhere, people running around shouting, vendors screaming at each other. I'd been told to be careful of pickpockets while I was there. However, luckily I made it through unscathed. And it was also while I was there that I decided to finally pick up a Peruvian SIM card because the eSIM hadn't worked. And while I was standing in line there at the kiosk, there was an Australian traveller standing in front of me, and she was also trying to get a SIM card to work in her phone. And you know the little tray that comes out of your phone which holds the SIM card? She was sort of fiddling with that, and at one point she just dropped it, and it fell down under the counter or somewhere, and she started screaming and screaming. She was, fuck, like this. And I was standing there like, oh my God, what happened? We're trying to calm her down, but she was just like screaming, where the fuck is it gone? Fuck! She just kept screaming the word fuck in the face of this Peruvian woman who had no idea what was going on. The joys of encountering Australians abroad, I guess. Eventually, I boarded the bus onwards to my next destination, Arequipa, and I slept on the bus through the night. And when I arrived in Arequipa, I knew that this was a place that I would try and slow down a bit. Even if the travel didn't slow down that much, I knew that I would need to slow down the sightseeing, because after traveling through Bolivia, I mean, Bolivia was awesome, but it was pretty exhausting. The altitude, I had sort of been a bit run down with some of the food that I'd been eating and not getting enough sleep. I think by now this was my third overnight bus in a matter of weeks. So I knew that once I hit Arequipa, I'd need to take stock. I checked into the Mango hostel, I rested up a little bit, and then spent the afternoon doing a catching up and reorganizing my life kind of afternoon in a glitzy shopping mall just out of the center of town. The shopping mall had a hypermarket, money changers, nice cafes, and while I was there, I got myself some new toiletries. I bought myself a new pair of jeans because the ones that I'd been wearing through Bolivia were literally starting to fall apart. I got some money changed. I finally got my SIM card sorted because the one that I'd bought at the bus station in Puno didn't end up working anyway. Maybe that's why the Australian woman was so angry. I got a haircut, and I also bought myself a bit of a bougie lunch. I got back to the Mango hostel just in time to start breaking out in cold sores. Like I said, I was pretty run down. I think it was my body's way of saying, now, finally, now you can be sick. That evening, I went out to meet Sergio for a drink. Now, you might remember Sergio from my video at New Year's in Cartagena, and we met at a bus station in Cartagena on our way to Santa Marta in Colombia back at the start of the year. Sergio originally hails from Peru and had told me to call him up once I arrived in Arequipa. We went out together for dinner and had pisco sours together, which was lovely. And then pretty early, I headed back to the hostel and called it a night. The next morning, I woke up and had breakfast and then set out to gently stroll around Arequipa. Like I said, I was taking it slowly at this point. Arequipa sits beneath a chain of volcanoes and is known as Peru's White City because so many of its colonial buildings were constructed from pale volcanic stone called silla. It's also one of the most historically significant colonial cities in Peru and is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of its architecture and preservation. Walking around there felt like stepping into another era. Grand churches, elegant plazas, volcanic peaks looming in the distance. It had this refined, relaxed atmosphere that felt completely different from the intensity of Bolivia. I spent most of the day just wandering, taking in the streets, sitting in plazas, exploring old buildings, and letting myself slow down for the first time in a while. And yet Peru frustratingly still felt like a country that I wasn't experiencing at its best. When I had arrived in Lima in early April with Amit, we'd taken a very early morning flight out of Chile, so we arrived exhausted. When we went to Machu Picchu, that was the one day in Peru that it was raining while I was there. And then here I was in beautiful Arequipa, but sort of recovering from the chaos of Bolivia. But even in that state, Arequipa was wonderful. The next day was Mother's Day, and Sergio is actually from another part of Peru, so we spent the day wandering around the city together. We visited this really cute Mother's Day market up on the hill. We walked through the historic center, and we eventually went out for lunch at a traditional restaurant in an old mansion. The restaurant was a picanteria, a traditional style eatery, and we ordered alpaca lomo saltado and chicha morada, a drink made from purple corn. And then in the main plaza of Arequipa, we celebrated the Peruvian edition of my 40th birthday. We had suspiro de limeña, a Peruvian dessert of manjar blanco, which is similar to dulce de leche, and it's topped with meringue. The next day I visited the Monasterio y Museo de la Recoleta, this gorgeous old church and library complex. Wandering through it felt like entering a hidden world. Bright walls, narrow alleyways, courtyards, and silence. It was spectacular. And then that evening, I headed up to a rooftop bar overlooking the city to watch the sunset over the volcanic landscape surrounding Arequipa. And at that moment, it really hit me that I had crossed the Andes and that the great spine of South America was finally behind me. This was the first of several goodbyes that I started to say to South America and Latin America, because I had been traveling up and down the Andes over the prior couple of months, and finally the Andes were behind me. It was the beginning of the final stretch of my trip through Latin America. It was an emotional moment, I have to say. And by then I had felt like I'd spent enough time recharging and that I was sort of getting back to my regular self, and so naturally it was time to jump on to another overnight bus and onwards to my next destination. And that destination was Nazca. Apparently the route hugged the Peruvian coast for much of the journey, but I saw none of it because it was completely dark the whole way through. The next morning I arrived in Nazca and checked into the Hostel Casablanca, which felt less like a hostel and more like a bed and breakfast. And the very kind owner there was nice enough to let me check in early, and I hit the sack. Although I had recharged while I was in Arequipa, I still wasn't having those sort of repeated nights of proper sound sleep. And you know, I felt like I was okay, but again, one overnight bus and it all sort of came flooding back. And you know, this probably should have been a warning sign, and it was In retrospect, it was pretty foreboding as to what was about to happen. The next morning I woke up and headed out almost immediately to see what virtually everyone comes to Nazca to see, and that's the Nazca Lines. Because really, the town of Nazca is not that much of an event. It's really just a highway stop on the highway between Arequipa and Lima. But the Nazca Lines are one of South America's great mysteries. I boarded a regular bus heading north towards the city of Ica, but about 20 minutes into the journey I was dropped off on the side of the highway in the middle of the desert. And that was it, because from ground level, the Nazca Lines really aren't that visible. The figures were designed on such a huge scale that you really need elevation to understand what you're looking at. The Nazca Lines are enormous geoglyphs, carved into the desert floor by the ancient Nazca culture, believed to date from around 500 BC to 580, predating the Incan civilization. There are hundreds of lines and figures spread across roughly 450 square kilometers of desert. Some are simple geometric shapes and perfectly straight lines stretching for kilometers. Others are giant figures, animals, birds, spiders, monkeys, and hummingbirds drawn directly into the earth. But the truly strange thing is just how precise they are. These figures were made long before flight existed, yet they're perfectly proportioned when viewed from above, almost as though they were specifically designed to be seen from the sky, which naturally has led to endless theories. Some people think they were ceremonial pathways, others think they were astronomical calendars, and then of course there are the alien theories, that they were somehow connected to extraterrestrials or meant as signals to the sky. Whatever the reason, standing there in person and viewing them, it's really eerie and it's almost a little unsettling actually. So I paid the small entry fee, climbed the observation tower, and from the top you can see several of the major figures etched into the desert floor. And it really is astonishing. The sheer scale of them, the precision, the mystery of it all. Now you can get a better perspective on the Nazca Lines, and that is to take a light plane up and take a joy flight over the lines. However, that costs over $100, and apparently almost everyone comes back violently motion sick because the pilots constantly tilt and tip the plane so that passengers on both sides can see the figures below. So apparently it really is just a gamble as to whether you're going to think that the whole experience was worth the money or not. I decided probably wouldn't be. I was perfectly happy seeing them from the observation tower, and I saved myself a lot of money. So I'm now on my way to the natural viewpoint, Mirador Natural. I've been told that this one is worth it. It's 1 kilometer down the road from the tower that you can see behind me. And I'm currently walking down the Panamericana Sur, the Pan American Highway. And I hope that this is worth it. The guy at the desk back there told me that it was. From there you can see additional figures and some of the huge lines stretching across the landscape. And it's from that other vantage point that you really appreciate how impossibly straight some of these lines are as they carve through the desert, interrupted only by the modern Pan American Highway. And perhaps the strangest thing of all is that the lines remained largely unknown to the wider world until the early 20th century, when pilots flying over the area finally noticed them from the air. And with that done, I flagged down the next bus heading back in towards the town of Nazca, made my way back along the Pan American Highway, got into Nazca, picked up my luggage from the hostel, which was luckily only about 3 blocks away from the bus station, returned to the bus station, and then booked a ticket onwards to the city of Ica. The journey through the desert was probably only about another 3 or 4 hours, and I decided that Ica, or around Ica, would be another place to break my journey between the south and the capital of Peru. And at this point, I'm going to break my journey through this vlog, because if you're enjoying what you're seeing, please consider giving this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and share it across your social media channels. And if you really like what you're seeing, please tell your family and friends about this. It really helps me grow this YouTube channel. I finally pulled into the city of Ica, which is a sort of small city, large town in the Peruvian desert, and then immediately got into an Uber, which would take me all the way to Huacachina, which is a desert oasis in the sand dunes just near Ica. Huacachina is basically a tiny oasis town sitting right in the middle of the desert, almost perfectly cradled by these enormous sand dunes. And it's gorgeous. It's one of those places where people arrive planning to stay for a night or two and somehow end up there for a week. There's so much to do there. You can go paragliding over the dunes. You can go sandboarding, quad biking, dune buggy riding, hiking out into the desert, all sorts of extreme and adventure sports. But by this point in the trip, I was pretty happy to slow down and use an oasis for what they're designed for, and that was to really chill out and refresh. I checked into the Desert Nights hostel, which looked like a resort, spent the afternoon relaxing around the oasis in the center of the town, and then later made my way up to the top of one of the massive sand dunes overlooking Huacachina. The climb itself was hard work. Walking up sand dunes is taking one step forward and sliding half a step backwards every single time. But once I got to the top, it was absolutely worth it. From up there, the entire oasis sat below me, glowing in the late afternoon light, surrounded by these endless rolling dunes, stretching off towards the horizon. And as the sun slowly began to set over the Peruvian desert, I just sat there taking it all in. There's something about desert sunsets that makes you reflective. Maybe it's the silence or the scale of it all. As I made my way back down the dune towards Huacachina, the lights of the village started to flicker on, reflected in the water surrounded by palm trees and desert sand. And by then, it was just perfect. I knew that I had loved my time in Peru, but I also knew that I had really just scratched the surface of this incredible country. I think Peru, more than most countries, really rewards time, like proper time invested in getting to know it and learning about the culture and experiencing these things. And it was something that I just hadn't really afforded it, unfortunately. However, that wasn't the end of my time in Peru. There was one last place to visit, and that was where I would finally see the Pacific Ocean once again. To find out where that is, make sure that you tune in again next time on a special edition of Latin America Diaries this Monday, coming to you right here on this channel. So don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then.